someone that sits back. Rather, he's an actor. He does and goes. Let's begin reading chapter 7. That is looking to take advantage of whatever Hashem gives him. Let's now see chapter 7. Vayihi ki yashav hamelech beveito, v'Adonai hiniach lo misaviv mikol oivav. David analyzes the situation. And what is the situation? On the one hand, he has a palace. On the one hand, he has a palace. But he also realizes internationally, he's not being attacked. Israel is not being attacked. In other words, the reason that the Tanakh brings this in one pasuk is that David knows that there are two prerequisites, at least, for the building of a temple. Two prerequisites, at least, for the building of a temple. Number one, David knows, as it's brought in the book of Deuteronomy 12, okay? There it says, I'll just transliterate from Deuteronomy number 12, that when you cross the Jordan and you dwell in the land that God is giving you, okay, and he leaves you rest from all your enemies and you're dwelling in tranquility, then it says, the place which God shall choose to dwell his name in, and so on and so forth. What do we see next to one another in Deuteronomy chapter 12? That when there's international peace, then there's a chance to build the place, right? The Torah doesn't say the Beit HaMikdash. The Torah doesn't say Yerushalayim. It calls it Ha-Makom, capital T-H-E place. Now, it seems to be that's one prerequisite, that there's international peace. But what must exist in addition? Look at source 2, Bet. In Bet, in chapter 17 of Deuteronomy, the Torah talks about coming into the land and appointing a king. Coming into the land and appointing a king. So now, then we see that the king has certain national mitzvot. Certain national mitzvot. Now, the appointing of a king, some of you know, there's a Talmudic statement which I didn't bring. Some of you know it, and the Rambam, Maimonides, brings it. Maimonides brings 3 commandments that the nation of Israel is obligated when they enter into the land. Do you know those 3 mitzvot, David?
I think so.
Aleph.
Anoint a king.
Appointing a king over Israel. Number 2.
War against Amalek.
To wipe out the seed of Amalek. And number 3.
Number 3, to build the Beit HaMikdash.
Exactly. What do you know, Rambam by heart? You're so knowledgeable. Wow.
So you don't have to completely defeat Amalek to build the Beit HaMikdash?
Good question. Saul went to war against them. He certainly hurt them to a lot. Agag eventually was killed, but there's still Amalekins around. It's a question, does all of Amalek have to be annihilated in order for Israel to build the Holy Temple? No. It's worth an investigation. It's not clear. But right now, according to this opinion that's brought in the Talmud that the Maimonides brings, does Israel have a king? Yes. Have they fought Amalek? Certainly. David thinks it's what? And I'm the king. I'm the king. I fought Amalek, or Amalek has been fought. Now it's time to build the Mikdash. But look what the Tanakh says. The Tanakh says that before he speaks to Natan the prophet in verse 2, why does the Torah say David is dwelling in his house? What is the problem? The fact that he's sitting in his house, that means he's not going to war. Why is he sitting in his house? Because he's not being challenged. It's just like the Torah says that when there are no wars around us and we have a king, that's the time to build a temple. So apparently, It says God, Heiniach lo misaviv mikol oivav. Why is he sitting as if he's idle, not going to war? Because God has brought international peace to David after so many wars that he's fought. So what does David think? David thinks, I have to, next stage, build a Beit HaMikdash. Now, how do you know if you have the rights to build a Beit HaMikdash? Pasuk Bet, verse 2. Vayomer HaMelech El Natan HaNavi. He goes to the prophet of the generation. Shmuel, as you know, has died. The next prophet is Natan the prophet. Re'ena, look, observe please. Chapter 7, verse 2. Anochi yoshev biveit arazim. I'm dwelling in a palace. My home is made out of cedar wood, which is great wood, raw material for building houses. Varon Elokim yoshev betoch hayuriyah. He's asking a question. Perhaps it can be read this way. David notes something ethical is not right. It's not right that I have this fabulous home that took 7 years probably to build it by Hiram from Lebanon, and I'm living in luxury, and opposite his house is what? What did he just bring over? The ark. He brought the ark of God over, okay? Hi. He brought the ark of Hashem over. And the ark is in this little tent. This little Oel Sayarim, okay? I'm living in a mansion, and the ark is living in a tent. There's some Kohanim there. There's some Leviim there. And David senses apparently a moral problem. A moral problem. It's not right. If the time is right that there's one king over all of Israel, and he has a fabulous house, well, isn't it the time that this ark not be under a tent with some curtains, but it should be in a permanent structure. Namely, the time has come to build a Beit Mikdash, a holy temple. That's what David thinks. Now, why do you think he went to the prophet? Why do you think he went to Natan the prophet? What is he looking for?
What's wrong?
To inquire. What does the prophet have that maybe David doesn't have?
Direct communication from Hashem.
You're right. Natan has the telephone number of Hashem. It's called prophecy. Capital P, capital Nevuah, prophecy.
He was like a major prophet in that time, or God also, there was a lot of prophets?
You're right that before the time of David, the time of Shmuel, the Tanakh tells us it's scarce. We don't have prophets. Very few. Now, it could be wide open, but Natan is the major prophet. You're absolutely right. He's one of the contributing prophets of Sefer Shmuel. What is Natan's answer? Pasuk Gimel. Vayomer Natan El HaMelech Kol asher bilvavcha lech aseh Ki Adonai imach. What does Natan not do? What does he not do here? What?
Tell him what to do. He just says what. He didn't tell him what
Furthermore,
He said what Hashem said, told him.
Why doesn't he tell him what Hashem said? In verse 3, what does Natan not do? He doesn't ask God. He doesn't go to Hashem. Instead, what does he say? David, you? The king of Israel? Whatever's in your heart, do it. What does he mean as far as heart is concerned? Heart is referring to wisdom. Natan gives an answer out of wisdom to David that also has wisdom. In order to be a prophet, there are ingredients. There are prerequisites to be a prophet. You have to have chokhmah, wisdom. You have to be wealthy in attributes. Here, Natan uses, I rely on your logic. I rely on your reasoning. Natan, of course, has to be a Talmid Chacham, a scholar. Otherwise, you cannot become a prophet. And he says, from a logical reason, from a logical understanding, David, do it. If you think that's right to do, who am I to stand in front of you? In other words, it could have been that the king didn't tell him to go ahead and ask prophecy. He just says, look at the situation. I'm sitting in a home made out of wood, and the outside my home, the palace, is a temporary structure for the closure or the cover of the ark. You know how the winters in Yerushalayim, we get a lot of rain. It's not good that it be there. But here, Natan gives advice. He says, whatever's in your heart, do it. Okay? It could mean that Natan did not understand David, that he should go ahead and ask Hashem. It could mean that. And therefore, if I don't have to ask Hashem, David, I rely on your halachic, your moral understandings, your Torah understandings, do it. Whatever Hashem do, God will be with you. He gives him a bracha. What happens in the interim? David gets a blessing, a green light from Natan. Yes? Now look at Pasuk 4, Dalet. Vayihi balaylahu. Vayihi dvar Adonai el Natan lemor. Pasuk 5. Lech v'amarte lavdi el David ko amar Adonai ha'ata tivne li vayit l'shifti? כי לא ישבתי בבית למiyom עלותי את בני ישראל ממצרים ועד היום הזה, והיה מתהלך באוהל ובמשכן. בכל אשר התהלכתי בכל בני ישראל, הדבר דיברתי? את אחת שבטי ישראל אשר ציוויתי לראות את עמי את ישראל לאמור, למה לא בניתם לי בית ארזים? The message of Hashem goes on for a few more psukim, but I want to stop here and analyze and first ask myself, why do we need the Tanakh to tell us when Hashem prophesies Natan? What does it say in the Pasuk? When does he prophesize?
Night.
When? Which night?
After that.
Balaylahu, that night. Which night? The night right after? Do what you think is right. Why is that? What is the Tanakh indicating? Why do we need the Tanakh to tell us that God's revelation to the prophet is happening that night? So quick. Why?
It's important.
It's important. What else? It's important. What else? There's
To be carried fastest way possible.
Rabbi Chanina in the Gemara, and Rashi brings him. David, he's not someone that sits back, procrastinates, waits. If David gets a green light, hello, Mr. Contractor, can you bring 3 tractors tomorrow morning? Hello, Mr. Developer, can you bring floodlights? Can you bring iron bars? Can you bring cement? David's on the way. He's organizing everything. If he's not going to be stopped now, he's going to probably lay the foundations tomorrow morning. That's David HaMelech. That's a Rashi that he brings here. He's quick. He might even hire workers. It says that really in Rashi, and so on and so forth. Plus, he makes nidarim vows. He may make a vow that he has to do this and do that. You have to stop him right now. And now we want to understand why. First of all, look at Pasuk 5. Lech v'amarta el avdi el David. There are not a lot of people that are called my servant. Who do you remember is called my servant? Moshe Rabbeinu. Who else? Yoshua ben Nun is called my servant. That's a very prestigious group. Ko amar Hashem, ha'ata tivne li bayit l'shifti? Are you going to build a house for me? What's the problem? Until now, that I took the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, and I've been appearing where? In a tent, in the tabernacle. Are those permanent structures? In the tents? In the Mishkan in Shiloh? Are those permanent stone structures? No. Wherever I've been, my presence, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, have I ever spoken out? Why don't you build me a house? I never did that. You're worrying for me to build a Beit HaMikdash for me? In other words, it seems right now the opening words of Hashem is, I don't need a house. That's what it seems. Have I ridiculed? Have I said something to anyone? Ken? Let's continue reading in verses 8 and 9. V'ata, and now, Kotomar la'avdi leDavid, tell my servant David, again a second time. Ko amar Hashem tzvaot, ani lekachticha min hanaveh. I took you from a stable of shepherds. David. What was David's job for his father Yishai? He was a shepherd in the city of Bethlehem, right? In the city of Bethlehem, I took you min hanaveh. Naveh is a stable for shepherds. Me'achar ratzon, after the sheep. Liot nagid, to be a leader. Al ami al Yisrael. Ve'yeh imcha, and I've been with you. B'chol asher alachtu, wherever you went, David, I've escorted you, God says. God is telling Natan to give this message to him. V'achritet kol oivecha mipenach, I've wiped out all your enemies in front of you. V'asiti lecha shem gadol, I've made you into famous. They know you in America. It existed then? No, America didn't exist yet, right? You're known all over the Middle East. People know you. Shem gadol, a great name. Kishem shagdolim asher ba'aretz, of the greatest people that ever lived in the land. David was the head of the army for Shaul. He's been writing out of divine influence Psalms. He fought against Goliath. He's very loved and appreciated by the nation of Israel, winning wars and bringing booty. He's well known. Pasuk Yud, verse 10. V'samti makom le'ami Yisrael. Look, I brought the nation. I've gave them a place to live in Israel. Unitativ, I've planted them in the land. V'shachan tachtav, and they're indeed living here. V'lo yirgaz od. There's no problem. There's world peace now. V'lo yusifu v'nei avla la'anototo. The crooked people are not going to add to do terrible things. Kasher barishona, like in the beginning, meaning Egypt afflicted us. Furthermore, Yud Aleph, ulemin hayom asher tziviti shoftim ala Yisrael. On the day that I've appointed leaders over my nation of Israel, vanichoti lecha mikol oivecha, and I've left you from all your enemies, meaning you've been saved. V'gid lech Hashem kivayt yaseh lech Hashem. Has there ever been a time that you should build a kingdom for God, a house for God? No. I never asked for it. It's very weird, isn't it? I've never asked for it. What am I asking? Verse 12. Ki yimle'u yamecha, your days will go by. V'shachavta et avotecha, you'll lie with your fathers, meaning you're going to pass away. V'kimoti et zaracha charecha, and then I'll establish your seed after you. Asher yitzim imecha, that will come out of your loins. Meaning you're going to have children. You will have what? A dynasty. Someone will take over after your name. V'chinoti et mamlachto. Hu yivne bayit l'shmi. Only after that your seed is established. You have grown-up children. And someone will take over after you pass away. He will build the house in my name. V'chonanti et kisei mamlachto ad olam. We want to understand here what's going on. Why is it that Hashem does not allow David to build? Only when there will be a dynasty. Someone will continue the chain after him. We know it will be who? Shlomo. It'll be Solomon. But it's not clear why. It's not so clear why. To get a better understanding, we have to open up Divrei Hayamim, the book of Chronicles. And the book of Chronicles, here we have, you don't have to turn the pages. In Divrei Hayamim, in chapter 22, we have it here, but you have it in English. And there, we have David speaking to Shlomo, maybe the end of his days. And it says the following, in chapter 22 of Chronicles 1. Vayomer David l'Shlomo b'ni. He says to his son Solomon, Ani haya im levavi livnot et bait l'shem Hashem Elokai. It was in my heart. I wanted to. I reasoned. I really wanted to build a house for God. Vayi alai dvar Hashem. And there were the words of God on me. Lamor saying, Dam larov shafachta. You spilled so much blood. Umilchamot gedolot asita. And so many wars you made. Lo tivne bayit lishmi. You shall not build a house for my sake. Ki damim rabim shafachta arta lefanai. You spilled too much blood. How do we understand? And if this is a prophecy, well, why wasn't it stated here? Is it a prophecy? Or is this what David understood from other things? There are those commentaries that really David never received this prophecy. But he's commentating on he's explaining other prophecies. Now there are many people that study the Tanakh, and when they come across this, they're saying, David is terrible. He spilled blood. He cannot be the builder of the Beit HaMikdash. That's one way of understanding it. However, the Radak, Rabbeinu David ben Kimchi, and others explain it a little differently. There are those that said that David spilled innocent blood. What do they mean? Two events that happened that legally David didn't do a crime, but innocent blood was spilled. One case the commentators talk about is the city of Giv'on. There, Shaul accepted Lashon Hara, and Doeg Adumi was alluding to the fact that who's collaborating with David? The Kohen Gadol, the high priest of Givon, is collaborating with David, and as a result, Shaul wiped out 80 priests. Now, David is not obligated in the death. He didn't speak Lashon Hara. But because of this event that David happened to go to that town, 80 people plus more, there were non-Jews, the Givonites were killed there as well. That's because of David, innocent blood was spilled. He's held for that innocent blood. That's how they explain Damim Rabim Shafachta. Not that he spilled the blood, but because of his appearance to that town, many people were killed. In other words, David, who's like a chassid, a saint is someone that goes above and beyond the call of law. He's held responsible that because of that he can't build the Beit HaMikdash. There's another case we're going to learn later about Uriah. That Uriah is sent to the battlefield, the husband of Bathsheba. We'll learn about that later on. And he, as if David caused him to be killed at the battlefield. That's one meaning. Another meaning is, do you remember we learned earlier when David was sitting in Galut? He was sitting in the Gaza Strip area or the Western Negev, and he was as if a partner with the king of the Plishtim, and he received land to live further south, southwestern Negev, called Siklag. Now, how did he show the king of the Plishtim that he's on his side? He fought wars of the enemies of the Plishtim. Now, the truth is, he really fought wars to help out the Jewish people to fight their enemies. But he fought some wars, not a lot, of the enemies of the Plishtim. And he took people into captivity. But what did he do to those people into captivity? He killed them. Why did he kill David? David is as if he has two personalities. He keeps his trust and honesty to the Jewish people. He fights the wars in the South Negev against the enemies of Israel. Yet he also fights the enemies of the Plishtim. And in order to keep his record as if the king of the Plishtim thinks that he is AWOL, that he is a friend of the Plishtim, He fights some wars against the Plishtim enemies, and he takes some people into captivity. But what does he do with those people into captivity? He kills them. Why does he kill them? Because he doesn't want them to speak out that David is really fighting the wars against the enemies of Israel and not the Plishtim. That's what the Radak brings as an example. Damim rabim shafachta. A lot of blood have you spilled. A lot of blood have you spilled. As if he's... Now, why did David have to do it? He had to do it to save his life. Because if those captive people would spill the words against David, he might be killed by the king of the Plishtim. He had to do that. He had no choice. Still, David is held to a certain degree responsible enough that he cannot build a Beit HaMikdash. A third meaning. What is Damim Rabim? We see here the name Shlomo is not mentioned, but we see later, although not here, Shlomo comes from the word shalom. Shalom. David had a very important role, much different than Shlomo had. David's role was to conquer the land. David's role was to defeat the enemies of Israel. That war is a mitzvah war, isn't it? What we call in Hebrew, milchemet mitzvah, the war of mitzvah. He had to do that. You know what? David did his role, and therefore his role is not suitable for the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Because the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, really signifies peace, shalom. It's not by mere incidence that the builder of the Beit HaMikdash will be a person whose name is Shlomo, which comes from the name Shalom. In other words, it's not that David is accused. You're no good, you spilled blood. No. You did an important role. You went to war. You prepared the turf, the land ready for your son to build it. Your son is called Shlomo. He will be the builder of the Beit HaMikdash. It's not that you did something wrong. In other words, there are many that explain this verse in Chronicles in a wrong way. It's not that David is being accused by God, but rather he now understands, whether it's a prophecy or it's David's understanding of Hashem's words, that the role of David was different. To go to war, to spill blood, legally, halachically. And the Beit HaMikdash will be a level after, when there's going to be more peace in the land, when there'll be more tranquility in the land. There will be a builder by the name of Shlomo, from the name Shalom. Shlomo in the name of Shalom. And therefore, that will be the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Do you follow? Questions? Okay, so we'll stop here and continue tomorrow from